If you want to learn how to transform your writing and communicate more effectively through dialogue, I'm going to show you how to analyze conversations using less than 5 minutes of screen time from Avatar The Last Airbender, the live-action remake, to tackle 4 concepts. Specifically, I'm going to use the dialogue between Aang and Mankiatso from the first episode to take a deeper look into foreshadowing, repetition, information dumping, showing, not telling, and we're also going to use this particular excerpt of dialogue to gain insight into Gyatso's intentions. That's right, it's just 5 minutes of on-screen airtime that gives you so much information. So let's get started with today's back-of-the-envelope analysis with a ghostwriter. In this video, we're going to cover part 1, which is foreshadowing. So dialogue has the ability to show us who the characters are without going into a full-on character analysis. Let me show you what I mean. In the original animation, we start with what we know. Mankiatso loved Aang unconditionally, and Aang adored him. So when things were too serious for Aang and the other kids didn't want to play with him, it was Gyatso who always lifted his spirits by being childlike himself. Their bond was on screen, heartfelt and pure. The council members, however, were quite unimpressed with Mankiatso's lax approach to Aang's training, in the sense that he should have already told Aang that he was the Avatar and he needed to step up and protect the world, given the precarious position that the Fire Nation had put the rest of the world in. So Gyatso was told that he was too soft on Aang and they were taking him out of his care to begin his training, because the needs of the world was greater than that of a single person's childhood. And it was this threat of being separated from Mankiatso that caused Aang to run away. Yep, he ran away. He wasn't a 12-year-old out for a midnight stroll to clear his head. So this is how Aang's story begins in the original. They were not shown these details until slightly later in the season, the episode called The Storm. The one prominent plot point in the original was that Gyatso didn't want Aang to have the responsibility of being named the Avatar so young. He wanted him to be a kid. And while this plot point didn't change in the live action, the approach was different and enacted through the dialogue. So let's have a look at the consequences and how the dialogue changes how we interpret Mankiatso's character. So in the live action, the first conversation Mankiatso has with Aang is about his responsibilities and how he needs to keep up with his training and not miss classes. Subtleties and nuances were clearly not present. And we're going to jump into the dialogue here, because Mankiatso then says to Aang, "You may be more advanced than the others, but there's still much you have to learn. And believe it or not, there may come a day when you wish you'd spent more time with your teachers." I mean, this is contradictory to what we know about Gyatso in the original. And this kind of line comes across as emotional dumping. And I really thought it was a parent's specialty. You know how they always tell you, one day when I'm dead, you're finally going to appreciate everything I've done for you? That was how I interpreted this scene, and brand new viewers would probably have done the same. So if we change the dialogue slightly to fit the original Mankiatso character, the dialogue may have ended up something like this. "Aang, if I knew you were going to skip class today, I would have joined you. It's been a while since I took in the view myself." And maybe gave him a knowing wink to convey his understanding that Aang may have been not feeling so great about himself, maybe being excluded from the games his friends were playing. So see, we're not changing the plot. We're not changing what happened and that he skipped class. We're changing the dialogue that helps expand our perception of Mankiatso's character. It aligns his words to what we already know about him. The particular line used in the remake of "there may come a day when you wish you'd spent more time with your teachers" could be considered foreshadowing to an unknown audience. But I felt that this on-the-nose reference missed the foreshadowing mark. They may as well have rewrote the line to read, "Aang, you're going to regret not spending time with your teachers," which in and of itself is problematic and untrue. So this is the challenge. Given what we know about who Mankiatso is, and in the middle of having a conversation with a 12-year-old kid who has an impossible destiny to fulfill, how do we then achieve the heavy burden of foreshadowing a genocide? I mean, we could play around and perhaps move the foreshadowing to a different scene completely. For example, in the scene where Mankiatso tells Aang that he's the Avatar. That's earth-shattering information. And in the original, it was Katara and Gran who had guessed at it until Aang had later revealed it. So by changing how the audience finds out that Aang is the Avatar, it should be a mic drop moment, but it isn't. It's talked about behind his back at the council. So if we accept that this is now how we find out about Aang, what can we then do to inject more emotion and more raw feeling into this dialogue exchange that also ticks the box of foreshadowing? How then do you put a spin on foreshadowing a message about impending death and destruction so that it feels original, thoughtful, and tactfully handled, while still having that ominous effect that foreshadowing does? I mean, we can do that if we let Gyatso say something the audience knows isn't true. I mean, he wouldn't be lying technically because his message would be a hopeful one. What if the dialogue was instead changed to say something along the lines of, I know that telling you you're the Avatar isn't what you want to hear, but you don't need to be afraid. I'm always going to be there for you. It's kind of sad, right? But it feels right for Gyatso's character in relation to his relationship with Aang. It's something we believe he would have said. It feels right and it feels believable. And if it were true and everything worked out, it would actually be perfection. And it's a nice thought to have at the back of your mind. What if everything had worked out? So it makes it sad without feeling too on the nose, too obvious. And for a second, you allow yourself to hope, and that's the feeling you want your viewers to walk away with when writing these pivotal dialogue scenes. And the viewers would interpret it as him really wanting to be there for Aang, though we already know he isn't going to survive the night. This means more by way of foreshadowing than the whole, one day you're going to wish you spent more time with your teachers.